And then line-by-line changes, we may not get to that tonight. We may have another workshop, maybe one devoted to traffic changes, but it kind of depends on what develops tonight. So without further ado, if we, if that's okay with everybody, maybe we can have a general summary by Scannell.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm Teresa Bakener with Whiteman, Osterman, and Hannah, and with me tonight is Zach from Scannell and Steve from, Steve, I forgot who you're with, McFarland Johnson. So what you have in front of you right now is the application that was submitted. Thanks very much. And nothing's been changed. It's exactly as it was submitted back then. So the only thing that's been added, two items that have been added, and that is the summary of the LFTC, EDC, PDD amendments, which you'll find in your package right after the EAF and the owner's authorization for submission of the application. And the other thing which you mentioned that you'd like to cover, which is the description of the buffers that we're proposing, both the original ones and how we're proposing to change it. And they're in the back right after the PDD amendment. So you indicated, I don't think it's necessary for us to go over again the change in the concept plan. What we're proposing to do here, as you know, is put in warehousing, which is more distribution center, in addition to other manufacturing type uses, but not solely limited to manufacturing uses associated with chip fab plants. So the majority of the changes that we're proposing to make to the PDD pull the development areas in which we're proposing to do the work out of the requirements that are specifically applicable to the chip fab plants, okay? For instance, the IRR report doesn't really pertain to this type of use. Some of the other limitations really, like best available control technology for air emissions, don't apply to distribution centers or indeed most modern, most manufacturing facilities. So if I can turn your attention to the summary that's there, this runs through simply the changes that are proposed. We, of course, also included the red line strikeout, so you can see how it relates to the PDD amendments itself and exactly the words that we're proposing to change. That's really the only way to do it for a local law, and I believe that you've done it similarly for other PDD amendments. So focusing first on the warehouse distribution center definition, which we've added. Now, why have we added that definition? We've added that definition because previously, the only types of uses that were allowed was the chip fab, and then uses that were secondary to chip fab, as well as a few other uses here or there. There was also an indication, I'm trying to think how far back this change was made, but there was some light industrial type definition that was added. So the definitions are at the back of the red line, and this definition of warehouses and distribution centers is the one that we have used for our clients in other towns. So what it does is it covers everything that occurs in a more modern distribution center. Warehouses have changed quite a bit. And just to draw your attention first to the last one, which is data centers. These facilities maintain a tremendous amount of data, which assists them in tracking what they're delivering and why. So whenever your daughter is expecting to get whatever she ordered in 2 hours or a day, whatever it is, it's the data center that enables them to track that. We also, in this definition, have receiving, storing, assembling, shipping, distributing. These are all the things that happen in one of the large distribution centers. Is there anything in particular that you had a question about concerning the definition?
If you could, you identify handling or storing of hazardous materials in the ordinary course of business. Could you give a little bit more detail on what we would be expecting there?
Yeah, it is primarily consumer products that are amalgamated for redelivery, delivery out. So you have consumer products which contain bleach, right? So all the stuff that you use in the house, like Drano, which nobody likes to think about, but which is a hazardous substance. The other thing that we have in here is fuel or batteries for trucks or forklifts, so that's just operations. Also for generators, you know, they have a lot of generators for backup power and things like that. But aside from the stuff that you buy from a warehouse and have sent to your house, it's stuff used in operation. Now, my understanding, a lot of warehouse and distribution centers no longer provide any type of fuel at the facility. I imagine that the vast majority of Scannell's clients wouldn't have fuel present at this site, correct, Zach? It'll change, I'm sure,
Well,
but,
it varies from client to client.
Yeah.
So some clients, especially when you talk about like forklifts, they want that stuff to be fueled on site. There's probably, I can name off the top of my head, 3 different clients that feel like they have a core competency where they provide their trucks and their third-party trucks gas at wholesale prices. But it's definitely a lesser use. It's not as mainstream as it was maybe a decade ago.
How would it compare? Obviously, we've got a really big tenant right next door that's working in a very technical space. How would the hazardous materials that you're talking about here compare to what's used in the semiconductor manufacturing process?
oh, these are very boring chemicals that are used. This is diesel fuel, gasoline, you
Okay.
know, it's stuff that you find at Stewart's.
Okay.
The
So-
ba-
So
yeah.
would you mind clarifying the definition to make that clearer? Because it's
No,
not,
we can do
it's not
that.
clear.
Absolutely no problem.
I think particularly for the layperson, they look at that and that sounds scarier than it is.
Okay.
I mean, if this would, as drafted, as I understand it, it would allow those materials to be taken, repackaged in facilities. So large quantities of these products, could be brought in, I don't know what size containers, and could be kind of processed and packaged in the facility.
We're happy to provide
It's
more
not-
detail. That's no problem, John.
And one of the things I would encourage you, I know you've had some conversations with Global Foundries, is if there are some examples you can learn from what they have and what is allowed on their site, and perhaps that's an opportunity for you guys to partner a little bit. That may give you some better insight as well.
On that point, I mean, the EAF, my own, position, as you see from the written comments I sent you, is that, there's a bunch of places where you didn't provide any information. This is one of them, and that's why my position is this doesn't go anywhere until that's complete. And hazardous materials is one of the places where there isn't any detail. So, I mean, if that's what you intend, would be the use there, I'm not sure why that's not on the EAF, because it would have potentially saved this discussion.
Well,
And
that's okay. I mean, we can only do as much as we can. And to the extent we haven't been clear, we're more than happy to clarify it. And also, I think part of with the EAF, it was filled out extremely early in the process, and we knew that we were going to be doing a supplemental environmental impact statement. So, the form is the form, and SEIS is a much better vehicle for describing things like that.
Right, but to scope the SEIS, we have to clearly identify the impacts to begin with, right? And without that information in the EAF, we might not do a thorough and complete scope.
Did anybody have any more questions regarding any of the other provisions in the definition?
You have my questions, you know, to me, it looks like, you know, retailing alcohol and retailing, you know, marijuana products. I mean, those,
Well,
I'm just opposed to that.
right, I note your comment, and we want to hear everybody's opinion on the marijuana.
Certainly.
The alcohol, beer, and wine is, it's just a list of a product that may be sold out of there. Probably in New York State, not very likely. Be distributed, yes, I'm
Distributed,
sorry,
not sold,
Not
right?
sold,
Well,
right.
the
Yeah.
definition allows the, you know, the sale there, right? Because
Well,
I almost think it used the consent, I don't have
It
the
is-
definition in front of me, but it allows
just to be clear, it's
Look,
not
they
a
were in
sale like you walk in and you buy it. The sale is that you, that it will be distributed from that point. We're not proposing retail uses here, that's,
If that's the case, I think you might be better served by a little refined, you know,
okay, no
language.
problem. We can do that. We can do that. This-
And you asked for, you know, the other board members' input on the marijuana aspect, and I agree with John. I think that needs to be removed. So I think subdivision 3 from the definition of technology and light industrial would have to be removed. That's my 2 cents worth.
And I favor that also.
That would be Roman numeral 3 on the cultivation, growing, processing of marijuana.
Yeah.
Correct.
I will though diverge. I understand what the definition that you have here with vis-à-vis alcohol, the definition, so I'm less concerned about that. I know, you know, there's just a difference of opinions on that, but I do agree with Darren and John on the marijuana issue.
Well, let's see if we can make everybody happy
Sure.
and clarify the one definition.
Clarity is always better, right?
Yeah, clarity is always better, and we hear you on the marijuana, we understand what you're saying. I assume other agricultural products would not be an issue there.
Not an issue for me.
Sure.
Nor for me. The only reason that marijuana is an issue for me is that to date, it's still illegal not only in New York State, but on the federal level. If that changes, I'd be willing to entertain that change, but.
Thank you very much.
Teresa, note that the, you know, the language now says serving, you know, those products, not just selling them.
We'll take a look at that.
So serving, food, groceries, alcohol.
Well, serving, I mean, they're gonna have a cafeteria or something on premises for the employees.
Yeah, so
That's
again,
probably why that's included in there. So
Some-
we can clarify. Zach, is there anything you want to add to that? Okay. All right. Anything else there? All right. And Supervisor O'Connor, what was the second topic you particularly wanted to hit?
Let's see, the second topic.
I don't want to miss
Um,
it.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, though,
Okay.
it's square footage and lot coverage, but before we get to that.
Sure.
The campus commercial, could you just go over that a little bit? I mean, what did you have in mind for campus commercial, what kinds
Well,
of?
yeah, I was a little bit confused by that because campus commercial was always included in there. So the only thing that we were doing is making clear that you could have businesses intended to serve the needs of the campus community located within buildings, which is like the cafeteria type idea. It might be a third party instead of, you know, run by the warehouse or distribution center. Things like restaurant, fast food. There was always a concept that would be provided in a very limited fashion within the park for people who work there. So that's why we thought, well, why not put it in those pods as well? If we can fit it in amongst the other uses, it makes sense. That was it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You know, one of the things that I know you're aware of is that I have a concern, and I think other board members, that, you know, we don't set up a situation where there's a competition of retail between, you know, the campus and, you know, existing businesses in Malta. So that's what we try to avoid with that.
No problem, no problem. That's definitely not our intention.
Any other questions?
Just one other quick note, and I'll ask, I've asked Shelby to do a little homework on this, and I've shared some thoughts, and it may not directly apply to you guys, but as we're looking at opening up the PDD, it's just a suggestion that I would have, that the definition that we currently have on nanotechnology manufacturing facilities is somewhat dated.
Okay.
And I obviously, the industry has changed significantly since this was originally drafted, and I think you know, it's not necessarily incumbent upon you as the applicant here, but I think it's something that would behoove all of us to consider. I don't have an appropriate language update at this point, but I know I've asked Shelby at Prosperity Partnership to do some homework within the industry and come back with some feedback about maybe some examples to be shared with you as you go forward.
Yeah, we have no problem with that. What we've deliberately tried to do here is not mess with Development Area 1 or anything related to nanotechnology. And believe me, if we did, it was only by accident.
Right,
So
right.
we don't have any specific wisdom on that point. So I'm glad you're reaching out to others. Presumably, somebody will reach out to Global Foundries on that point, too.
Absolutely.
So,
One of the things that I was thinking of, if we have a more encompassing definition, something like advanced electronics, then, you know, that could be defined to include, quote, nanotechnology, end quote, so we wouldn't have to change every reference to nanotechnology in the whole PDD.
Right.
Teresa, in the definition, or excuse me, yeah, the definition changes, you see I have a question here. Your red line shows changes to development areas 4 and 11, which you're not
yeah,
proposed to. So I'm looking at your red line.
Yep, and we can take that out. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm not sure if it's good or bad. I don't know what the reasoning behind it is.
Well, I think we tried to come up with some consistency, and there were also, and Leah can speak to this as well, I think there were some changes that had previously been made in SEISs and local laws that were adopted before. Remember when LFTC EDC came in and said, can we have everything and any use that's allowed in any development area should be allowed in the other ones? So that may have been what confused us on that point.
Okay.
So, but we'll take another look at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Square footage and lot coverage, I mean, you know, there's a change in the numbers there. And there's also the introduction of net leasable area, and my conception of that is, you know, places in a building that's rented as opposed to a mechanical room, a hallway, you know, things like that. So that's a change to the current PDD that just talks about square footage, and I imagine that's just the more current way to refer to these things. Is that where we are
It is
here?
indeed. This was one of those consistency point. It's like when you're in chemistry and your professor goes, well, what's the units? So that was the unit we came up with. You know, you could do gross square foot, but in the
Why-
industry, net leasable area is just typically what's used.
Why? But we don't use it for the rest of the tech campus, right? So
Well-
why not just use gross square footage so that everybody understands all the time that you're using the same benchmark?
Well, if we had found gross square footage used consistently in this document, we might have stuck with gross square footage, but there's lots of places where there's no description of how you determine how much square footage is there.
Okay, but
But
net leasable square footage, you know, is a term of art, right, used in, income properties where they're leased, right? You know, and it doesn't include a lot of things,
Well,
right?
it doesn't include habitable areas. So.
Yeah, support
or-
areas.
Or
It-
areas that people move around in,
Yeah.
so from a traffic.
Machine room, mechanical rooms and such. So we won't know, how big those other areas are. Why not just give us definitions where we can tell what the total build is?
We can look at that. We can look at that. The advantage of the net leasable areas, it's more helpful in terms of traffic as well, just to know that you're talking about areas where people are. But we'll look at that, John, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
So looking at the, what we did here, so if you, I'm just trying to find the exact location of this. Okay, so what we did is on page 34, when we read through the PDDs in the past, in the previous versions of the local law, and when we looked at the environmental impact statements, we had a great deal of difficulty understanding how much of the build-out would be allowed in each of the development areas. And so what we needed to know for purposes of marketing and all we needed to know what that number would be. We also needed to know it for traffic purposes. So on page 34C, we established thresholds for each development phase and thresholds for trips. So the language that we added is for development areas 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9, a total of 1,900 AM trips and 2,100 PM trips, or 3.5 million square feet of net leasable floor area, we'll look at that, John, shall be permitted. So what we were trying to do was pin down the maximum amount of development that could be allowed in each development area, because before it was very much dependent on what other development had occurred in the entire park. And so it was very hard to tell what it was that we could do. And that's why we came up with the drawings and the plans that you see that were included in the packet, because we needed to know what that number would be. And the biggest change, there's two biggest changes that allow us space to put the larger structures on the property. And I know we're discussing this later. That is changing the buffer and increasing the amount of lot coverage to 85%. Now, I've heard from several people that there's some question as to whether the lot coverage was for the entire park, in which case things like the 100-acre woods and the trails and stuff would be relevant to whether or not, that percentage was met. And again, the problem that we have with that is just, that's historical. So we don't know how that worked out. All right, so for us, we need to know for those, for the areas that we're proposing to build in, what our percentage is for that area. So that's why we came up with the number. And you'll see that there's a couple of other places in here where we just were mistaken because we didn't know the history of this. Like the water company is gonna do development area 5. We're fine with that. We will change that back. It doesn't matter to us. We just thought it was maybe a historical issue, because I know the water supply was brought in for Luther Forest. We didn't know if that had changed, and Leah and Jamie and Floria were kind enough to tell us that still remained the same.
Do you have, it sounds like you have a series of changes that you're gonna propose based on more recent information you obtained, is that correct?
No, I would say the only thing that we are changing back is the one regarding the water service.
Okay.
That's the only one, yeah. And of course, we're going to respond to your, your questions, concerns, and requests for clarification. It's an iterative process.
And Leah, on the water service, do we have to run this by the authority or SWS or anything? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I don't think we need to, I think what we were talking about is that there's an agreement between Saratoga Water Services and the Saratoga County Water Authority that settled a dispute
Right.
several years ago that resulted in Pod 5 being serviced primarily by SWS, everywhere else being serviced primarily by SCWA, with possibility of backup by SWS.
Right.
So I think it's a settled thing, and I don't think we need to
Okay.
modify them.
Good, thanks.
To your point about this page 34, I want to make sure I understand, which is always a shaky proposition. So please be patient with me. So the transportation capacity of the tech campus and the surrounding, roads and intersections is pretty well figured out. It's been studied, and several GEISs have looked at it, looked at what would have to change as demand grew for, transportation infrastructure. What I think you're saying is that you want to grab onto, or that the needs of your maximum build-out would necessitate these numbers of AM, PM peak hour trips. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Sort of. What we did was, there was a max, based on all the previous studies, of 2,400 peak hour trips that are allowed, and the entire roadway network system is designed for that. What we did was, we subtracted out the development that's already been built in NYSERDA, and said that's already subtracted out, and there's a net allowable trips for this ancillary development area. And that's what we had basically ran the trip generation numbers backwards to come up with the 1,900 and the 2,100 trips, peak hour trips respectively.
I think Darren may envision that this is a discussion on its own, because I have follow-on questions to your answer, and that probably would start us down the road of something that is going to be separately discussed. So,
Okay.
yeah, maybe I'll just keep my powder dry for the time being.
Okay, well, maybe we can, cover the other subjects and then come back to traffic and see how far we get tonight. How about that?
Works
Sounds
for
good.
us.
Okay.
Works for us. So do you have any more questions about the quantity of development?
I mean, I had a series of questions. You have them. You're always challenged here when you're doing this as a community with trying to gauge whether, a proposal is actually likely to happen. And so for us to, make really dramatic changes, which these are to our PDD, I'm trying to understand, is this going to happen, and when would it really happen? I realize that you will give no guarantees. You can't give any guarantees, but it's something I'm trying to, gauge, because the changes are so dramatic and, present significant impact to the community. I don't want to go through this process only to find that, we've spent a lot of time, we've gotten our community involved, maybe, folks anxious over something that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I
be honest with you, I want to know, as best you can,
Right.
what you actually envision happening here.
And perhaps, Zach, I know you've shared some thoughts on the market. Perhaps that would be a good indicator.
Yeah, I can, let me add a few comments to that. So I think, one, I mean, hopefully, if nothing else, the best indicator of how serious we are and how committed we are to investing in Malta is what we're already investing, right? We're spending a good amount of money to be here, to have consultants engaged and involved. And I think I hope everyone involved in this to date would say that we've been a very active participant, and we've been putting a lot of resources to this. We can all argue about kind of the level and all that, but hopefully that's good evidence. We've made commitments in the past, while not hard, right? We'd love to be breaking ground in the spring. I think I just saw an article this morning kind of quoting me from early in this year when I had said we were really lined up to break ground in July. I think given kind of the pace that this is going, we might not meet that goal, but we were fully committed to break ground this summer on our first project.
How big would that project be?
I think we've talked about different concept plans. So if you look at the current concept plan that we're looking at, 5 buildings, you think that we'd start with one of those buildings being at least 400,000 square feet. I think that's a fair expectation to have of what we're looking at doing in our first building. And I think I've gone through, last time I was in front of the town board, talked about the phasing of the 5 buildings, the schedule that we're projecting and we're interested in doing. I think what I can tell you now that we've kind of gone public with all of that, and we've had Pyramid actively marketing the project and talking to prospects, I think they could tell you that we're probably going to be in a bit of a land rush here, and I'm not sure that we'll be able to wait 5 years to develop it all. I think we've got a long list of prospects that are very, very interested in moving forward pretty quickly. So I think I've undersold it to date, to be quite honest. I hesitate to say that. I've already done it, so.
Cat's out of the bag, man.
So you see the full 3.5 million build within 5 years?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question that John also outlined in his questions. You know, you say 2,400 jobs. What types of jobs are we talking about? Are they minimum wage jobs? Are they career jobs? Are they?
Yeah, and that's
I like it better when Teresa answers all the questions. Yeah, so I would say we're looking at, I think when I was in here last time and talking about our vision for the site, we had talked a lot about kind of who our potential clients were, or who our typical clients are. And I think all of that's still very much true. And so when you look at that kind of caliber of employer, you really see consistency of they're all, I think of like you've been seeing in the news the past couple of weeks of the debate about the minimum wage raising. And you see a lot of these companies, the Fortune 100s of the world, saying we've been doing this for years. And so I think when you think about these kinds of world-class companies, they're already committed. So you're talking about median incomes. We had, last time I was here, our fiscal analysis with us. And I think we had projected somewhere north of $50,000, $60,000 a year as the median income, based on where we see elsewhere in the country and adjusted for this market. So I think you see things like that. So very much family-sustaining wages. And so when you're talking about that 2,400, it's a variety, though, of everything that's on site, whether that's someone filling boxes with product or operating a forklift, all the way to someone sitting in the office at a VP executive level for a company. And you'll see everything in between.
So you're not counting necessarily the construction jobs. These are
No, those are
pretty sure they're
on-site,
2,400.
direct, long-term jobs.
construction jobs too, though,
I
didn't
want to say 900, you said originally?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
you? We have it.
I don't want to make things up, but.
I don't think you undersold it yet.
No one has ever accused me of that.
Yes, 900, 934.
So I did undersell it by a tad, a bit.
34 people are gonna go home.
Okay, in terms of setbacks and buffers, I can say that, when I looked at the numbers just in the raw language, the wording, it kind of looked like a lot to me, but I'm looking at the sketch that McFarland submitted, and I'm looking at the blue, red, and black lines. And so, the changes don't look as significant to me as I thought. I'm looking at the areas, most of the areas, I think 5 out of the 6 are where the 4 buildings are situated. That composes the rocket site, I think, where the slab would be above it, and so we can, kind of cover up that environmental area. There doesn't appear to be any residential areas, close to those 4 buildings. The big building in area, I think it's 5. It's significantly, southwest of the stream. The residential area is further north of that stream, it seems to me. So it seems to me that there's a pretty good buffer between what you're proposing and any residential area at all. So could you just kind of turn to that sketch and explain to us what the difference is between the red, the blue, and the black lines?
Yes. If we're looking at the first sketch, just to point.
Can we make sure we're looking at the same thing here? Have I,
Definitely.
Yeah. There's edge of pavement, setback from edge of pavement, EOP. That's the one we should look at first, I think.
is it
because-
labeled, Teresa, so that
Yeah,
we can,
right in the corner.
setbacks from right-of-way?
Nope, the next one, right after that.
Setbacks from EOP, John.
EOP, edge
Okay.
of pavement.
Okay, got it.
In the original PDD, they cited to edge of pavement, sorry, Zach, edge of pavement in all of the limitations. And that was because at that time, Luther Forest Tech Campus owned the roads, okay? Subsequently, they've transferred the right-of-way of the roads to Saratoga County, as I understand it. And so the other drawing, which has at the bottom, is setback from right-of-way. Now, the Chazen had asked us just to look at it both ways to see which was more useful or graphic. The edge of pavement is a little bit simpler to follow, in my opinion, but I'm a lawyer, not an engineer. So if you look at the edge of pavement one, you'll see that we're bringing the parking forward roughly, I'm going to say 25 feet. That's basically what we're doing. So the first 25 feet are undisturbed from the edge of pavement. The next 25 feet are landscaping. And then at the 50th foot, then you could have parking. And then the buildings, of course, are even further back. So that's the way we've set it up. And you'll also notice that we're treating all of the development areas as essentially one area for purposes of setbacks, so they can, run into each other in the middle and share parking. And I believe John had asked, well, how would you share parking? We'd use easements, cross-access easement agreements. That's typically what we would use. And, because it really looked like the original development areas were areas that were sort of not arbitrarily, but you know what I mean, they were areas that you had pointed out, but they didn't really relate to how the areas were necessarily going to be used.
Well, they were designed 15 years ago, and
But-
things change.
Lots of things have changed in 15 years, absolutely.
I didn't have gray hair 15 years ago.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about that. So, as far as the right-of-way drawing is a bit of a mess, and I believe the reason why is because they shifted the road right-of-way around to avoid wetlands at the time. I was actually involved with Luther Forest Tech Campus when they were getting the Army Corps of Engineers permit, and that was one of the things that they did. They just shifted it all over the place. It ends up looking fine if you look at the edge of pavement, but if you look at the right-of-way, it's a little bit crazy. We can do it either way.
Right.
It's up to you all, but for us, it just seems easier to use the edge of pavement. Then when you look at the one nearest the residential area, originally that had that 400-foot buffer. We're not proposing to build anything in that 400-foot buffer. You can see there's like a little parking there or something. We can adjust that. The reason why is it was originally a 400-foot undisturbed buffer, and we need to regrade that in order to do the construction, and then after it's regraded, it can be replanted, and it'll still be a buffer. We're not proposing to do, you can see we're not proposing to do anything in there, so. But it's kind of steep,
Right.
so that's the reason why we did it that way. Did I get that right, civil engineer? Okay, all right.
So at the risk of overcomplicating something that might not need to be overcomplicated,
Sure.
one of the things that occurs to me is in many, many areas of the proposed site plan, the right-of-way and the setbacks actually work just fine. You know, they're actually okay. At least by my read of this, maybe I'm misunderstanding it. But is there an ability to leave the right-of-ways or setbacks as is and build in the exceptions where there are specific issues? Or am I heavily overcomplicating an otherwise simple issue?
I think that would overcomplicate
Okay.
it, because remember, the site plan's gonna be reviewed and approved ultimately by the planning board.
Right.
So they can shift us around. Part of the problem was just the undisturbed buffer versus disturbed buffer. You know, so we can have very robust landscaping, you know, but for purposes of construction, we still need to get in there and move dirt around. I
Right.
mean, if you've seen any of these facilities being built, the mass grading is a wonder to behold. So we just wanted to be perfectly upfront with you that we weren't gonna be able to do that without, you know, disturbing roots. It would just die anyhow.
Right.
You know.
So, you know, we'll consult with Steve and Leah on that, but, you know, my sense is maybe the board might be asking to put that concept, what you just told us about, we can't say it's undisturbed, but we can grade and fix it, but nothing will be built on it. You know, maybe we'll want to put that in writing so that it's in the PDD, so we can, you know, comfort the Luther Forest neighborhood behind it.
Oh, definitely for that one.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we can change
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just understand, as I'm sure you do, Teresa, because you've been to this rodeo many times, the statement by one town board member does not a vote necessarily make. So I just caution that I'm not in agreement with that concept yet. You may have a majority of the board, but I just want to be totally forthright with you, okay?
I think I appreciate your comments. I thought they were very to the point.
Very much.
I just want to ask, as the source of clarification, because I am not an engineer, or lawyer. So we're looking at this drawing with the setbacks from either one of them, you're asking us to change the setbacks for the buildings internally?
Yes.
Because it looks like you're still at the 100-foot setback. It's
That's
just, you don't want to have to use the 100-foot setbacks between the buildings and the individual.
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah. That's
Well, that sits better than the original reading of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's better.
right. Just say that, Steve. I want to be clear.
Just to clarify, what we want to change is the 100-foot setback right now is an undisturbed setback. And we want to switch that to the 100-foot building setback. So
Right.
disturbance can occur in front of that 100 feet.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense.
Okay,
Darren, if I could just real
Sure.
quick.
Go ahead, Mark.
In terms of the buffer, with undisturbed versus disturbed, or manufactured buffer, whatever you want to call it, given that you already know you'll be disturbing a lot of that land back there within that buffer, as you said, they would die anyway. You state in here that you're going to leave as many mature trees as possible. Shouldn't you already know how many mature trees you'll be leaving in there right now if you already know you'll be excavating a majority of that to where you can't leave trees?
We'll be able to show you that in the supplemental environmental impact statement. I wouldn't say at this point that we haven't pinpointed trees.
Do we know what's back there in terms of trees? Do we know the size of the trees, height of the trees? Do we know that before we even look at putting a buffer in that may or may not buffer between this project and the neighbors or neighboring properties?
Yeah, so I think, right, the important thing to remember is this is very much a conceptual site plan.
Right, I
And
understand
so it's gonna
that.
vary.
Mhm.
So I don't think I can tell you very clearly, we don't know, right? Because we don't know exactly the extent of the disturbance area we're gonna be looking at.
Mhm.
What we really were trying to go to, and we were using as our threshold here, was, one, what we thought we needed to do to make a site plan work really well. And then two, we've been consulting with our sound engineer and working with them to say what would give us a good level of assurance that we won't cause any disturbances to our neighbors. And it was really our sound engineer that really dictated this to us, that said, 250, we'll be able to show analysis all day long that makes everybody comfortable that there won't be any sound disturbances to your neighbors. Any less than that, and you're gonna start putting that at risk.
Right.
And so that's where we said, okay, great, we know we need a lot of help on the Seville, because there's that huge slope as you work your way northwest towards the stream. So we wanna get as much of that land to be able to get touched and help us with our grading as possible without affecting anybody.
Right, so we have no idea really what would even be left in there, what it would look like after,
Correct.
when you do landscaping.
Yep, and correct me if I'm wrong, Teresa, we've got, I think, a commitment here that we'd go back and replace plantings to bring the landscaping quality back.
And I ask that because several times, many times actually, I've seen, we'll leave as many mature trees as possible. And as we all know, all too often, that's not too many trees when they're done.
Right.
If it makes the job easier and they don't have to work around it, the trees will go. And I think that's very important to these adjoining homeowners and the property owners, that we leave as much uncut as possible.
And just to be clear, we are proposing 250 non-disturbed.
Yes.
So the area I was actually referring to with the roots being disturbed and stuff
Mhm.
was in the 25 feet undisturbed buffer along, say, Rocket Way for those structures, you know. And it may be, as part of the supplement, we would definitely be showing what the landscaping modules would be and stuff for that, so that people would see what we propose to plant.
All right, you say you have at least 400 feet in width adjacent to the residential areas with a minimum of 200, so
No,
I'm a little,
no.
No.
Maybe if I come up, I can show you. Would that be okay?
sure.
Okay. So, if we're looking at the end of pavement,
That's not what that says right there, though?
oh, that's the old definition.
Okay, all right.
So, let me just point this out. Here we are. This is where the people are.
Mhm.
Okay? So originally, this was all a non-disturbed
Right.
buffer. So what we would do, this would still be non-disturbed. This would be graded and then replanted.
Okay.
So, and then when we're done, there'll be 400 feet still. It's just it will have been disturbed for a period of time.
Gotcha.
That's all. Sorry
Okay,
about that.
that's all right. No, thank you.
Yeah, that really clarifies it.
Yeah.
You know, I like, speaking as one board member, I like the edge of pavement better than the right-of-way. I mean, the map looks a whole lot cleaner to me.
Yeah. I agree.
Jamie's gonna have to be the one that, deals with this. My impression is that generally our zoning code operates from edge of right-of-way, right? Setbacks are all edge of right-of-way. So this would be an exception to the rule that's otherwise applicable throughout town.
Well, but this started out from edge of pavement. That's why we.
Oh, it started out from
Yeah,
edge of
Started
pavement?
that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We weren't proposing to change it.
Sean Doty from Casey's River. The reason we brought up the question during one of the preliminary meetings of getting payment is that the town, one of the applicants is in control of the payment, right? So the county, Saratoga County owns the road and could change the payment, right? And so in the PDD language, they relied on some undisturbed buffer between the edge of pavement and the right-of-way line.
Well, that certainly makes sense. Could we say something like edge of pavement as determined by a 30-foot wide road? Can you say something like that?
I think the very simple method is to rely on the property line, rather than anything to do with the pavement itself, because if, again, if Saratoga County came in and wanted to clear cut the right of way for some reason, you know, you don't have that, you can't rely on that portion of the buffer. Right? It's not open space.
Right,
There's no landscaping in that area.
right, but that will cause us to change the setbacks then. So
Yeah,
that's
sure,
what's- Okay.
sure.
I just wanted to be
Right,
clear.
right.
It'll make them look much smaller than they do when it's at edge of pavement.
In other words, I'm
Still
sorry.
be relative to the center of the pavement though?
No, they would be on the property line, the property
Or
line would be shared between
that-
the county and the
Fixed point, yeah.
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 Nothing, at that point, it has really nothing to do with the road itself, the pavement.
Yeah.
Well, and
okay.
we would use the drawing, right, in the past, you had buffer drawings that showed where the setbacks were, and that's what we would propose to do, and just make it an exhibit of the local law.
So you're not moving your buildings no matter what we do, basically is what you're saying. On this issue, the buildings are where they are. So the buffer, the setbacks would have to be adjusted to square with the current.
That's what we're saying, that's
All right.
right.
So, I mean, Jamie and Leah, Steve, maybe, we can talk about what you need in terms of how we define this, right away, edge of pavement, or property line, or whatever.
Sure, I mean, ultimately, it comes down to what the town board wants. We can effectuate the goals pretty easily. We can talk with the applicant about, if we're doing that and get what we want. But ultimately, we need some direction to do that from the town board and how you want to handle it.
Are the, go
Sorry,
ahead, go ahead.
couldn't we provide some definitional standard that the edge of pavement, as of, July 1, 2021?
Yeah, and I think what Teresa might have just been suggesting is if you want to base it on edge of pavement, and if the amount of, the 100 feet is what you want, the way it looks on this map, I think what Teresa was getting to is that the map itself could be attached.
Could be
to the
memorialized,
legislation
right.
And be reliable without reference necessarily to where the pavement is, just the line itself,
Right.
as the setback.
Do you ever have measurements from the center of the pavement?
Throughout your zoning code?
And just in general out there, for legal descriptions and for,
That's the same standard.
because that would accommodate widening the road or narrowing it or whatever, it would still be the same center.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Unless the center line is shifted,
Yeah,
right?
unless it's just because it adds, unless you add to one side of the street.
I guess, right. Yeah.
I think probably the drawing is the best way to go, the most
Yeah.
easiest to, as a picture, I think it's easier to follow, especially with the right-of-way sort of all over the place, the way
Right.
it is here.
Right.
And it's, some is better than others, but you can see that it really kind of swings pretty wildly, widely in there.
Okay, discussion, comments about anything other than traffic? Why don't we,
I got a quick question on the homes that are in Jenna's Forest. How close are the actual homes to the property line? Any idea at all?
There should be a aerial photo somewhere.
That's
what we
possible,
need.
yeah.
this one, great.
Yep.
In addition, an additional 400 feet from the edge?
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Yep, we did superimpose the site plan on the aerial. I got it, yep, thank you. And the magenta line is the property line, so you can see there's an additional roughly 400 feet to the closest
Yep.
residential house. Because that's always an issue. All those houses back there, they keep getting fringed more and more, and it's a ongoing issue
So
throughout
this,
town.
sorry. So with this, so with the 400 feet from the property line, and then we're talking a 400-foot buffer, albeit initially disturbed, then returning, so it will be a total 800 feet from the house to the new construction, right? Okay,
250 feet of the 400-foot buffer
will be
not
totally
be
undisturbed. Okay.
So that's 650.
Yeah. Because especially this time of year, when there's no leaves on the trees, that distance seems a lot shorter.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask on behalf of my friend, the fire chief, will these buildings be fully sprinkled?
More than sprinkled.
More than
yeah.
sprinkled?
More than sprinkled. They have fire
Suppression.
suppression systems. And they also have, I believe, these, like all the other ones I've seen, will have the water for the firefighting, in a low-profile tank along the side of the building. So it's all right there. That's the way the last 3 I have done have it. So if you tell me I'm wrong, I'll just be really bummed.
I have I have a quick
I'm sorry.
question on, and I'm not sure when to ask it, so I'm gonna ask it now. As far as the rocket fuel that's on site there, it has a long history of being cleaned up, et cetera. When the construction happens here, is all the cleanup at that time satisfied?
Yes, it is. What we do have to move is some monitoring wells. So we'll have to work with EPA on the relocation of those monitoring wells. This area has been under, I would say it goes back 40 years at least, for the cleanup, and it was handled by EPA, and many companies participated in the site becoming what it was, let's just say. And, but if you look on the EPA website, they have a relatively recent report basically saying, that they're looking for certain restrictions, which they've always looked for, which is you're not going to use groundwater, which we're not, and that we're not going to, and that we'll have to work with them to put together a plan for when we do the construction in case we find unexpected materials there. So we've looked at all that stuff. We've looked at the media reports of when unexpected materials were found. I think it was in connection with Global Foundries. And so we understand what we need to do there.
So it has been cleaned up in full, and it's just being monitored, or?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
The detection levels are so low that there's no worry about like vapor intrusion into a building that you built?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so, but I will tell you that for a lot of these buildings, as long as you build originally with the passive venting, if you build the slab that way, it's not particularly expensive. It's not like retrofitting something. So we'll definitely be guided by whatever EPA tells us to do in that respect, but that's a very known technology and easy to implement.
Of course, we've got great consultant that we're working with on that is a group called Langen Engineering, large multinational group. This is kind of all they do is work on these kinds of projects as part of their environmental group. So we've got a specialized team that's helping us with that.
Okay. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Teresa, if I could just back up real quick, like to the fire suppression.
Yes.
Did I understand you said you're gonna have auxiliary tanks, storage tanks on site?
Yeah, and I said no.
Oh, you don't think so?
I don't think we're gonna need that. But we're gonna design ESFR.
Mm-mm.
So their standards, when we get the flow test, we'll hire a fire protection engineer to help us when we get to the individual buildings to make sure that we're satisfying those standards.
Okay, do you know right now if they're gonna be wet or dry systems?
Wet, they're gonna be SFRs,
Wet,
those are wet
okay.
systems, absolutely.
And they are designed to actually put out the fire, they're not sprinkled.
Correct.
Thank
Right.
you.
You guys have a whole series of very particularized questions from me, which obviously You may not have had a chance to read them all, and I certainly am not going to read them all tonight. So, I mean, you have them, some of them you've spoken to and others not. So, you know, I'm interested in answers and explanations on a number of these points.
I think we're all interested in all of them.
Yeah,
All of
well,
those questions.
I can't say that, I think we've covered the 2,500 jobs. And we're planning on putting the economic study in the supplemental environmental impact statement.
That speaks to where those numbers come from?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. And Zach has already answered the question about market demand. As far as the long-form EAF, what we would propose to do is address all your questions in the supplemental environmental impact statement, which will enable us to answer them fully, like estimated electrical demand, ambient noise levels. Well, you know, we're going to be doing those types of evaluations so we can establish that we won't have an impact on residents in particular.
But again, the scope of the, you know, EIS is going to be dictated by which areas of impact we include in the scope, right? And,
Well, I think it's clear that you would include noise in the scope regardless. You know, I mean, there's no point in going out and taking ambient noise levels for the purpose of filling out an environmental assessment form. You know.
I understand that, but,
Okay.
you know, there were probably 10, 12, 15 places where you didn't provide any information.
Right, and like I said, it was filled out earlier. I mean,
So I understand that. So you're saying the scope of the supplemental EAS is going to include all of those areas where you put will be within the parameters of the existing mitigation assumed in the secret record?
we're gonna have to address that specifically and show how it is. Yes, sir. That's gonna be
Okay,
in
because
there.
I didn't see where you provided a table of contents for a proposed SEIS, right, which you're looking to constrain the scope of that to that table of contents topically, right? That does not hit on all of the items where you did not provide information on the EAF.
Right, but in describing the existing conditions and the proposed conditions, we will cover those issues.
If I may, Stuart Messenger, remember the scope is yours. You know, we've given some comment, we're going to amend this, and I think part of the amendment needs to address some of the issues that were raised, so I fully appreciate Teresa's taking this to heart, because she knows this will be a problem. But let's make the scope that addresses the things that you and the other board members want to address, and I think your set of questions is a good place to start with. Comments, when we say comments, good. I may or may not get it.
Well, if you would like to switch to the scope of the EIS, we can certainly go right through that now, with the exception of traffic, which I understand is a bigger issue. I think the other ones are a little more straightforward.
I mean, that sounds like a good proposal to me, if the board is okay with that.
I mean, what I'm hearing, certainly the board, if they wanted, you know, can do that, but what I'm hearing is Stu wants to supplement, you know, their line of inquiry as well,
Well,
right?
we want to hear Stu's comments too, because I don't think we've seen them yet, so.
Yeah, so we gave, I think we gave to the board our comments.
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
So we would want to incorporate those comments, and I think we would want to make suggestions based on John's questions and what we're hearing tonight in other conversations. So, you know, I don't know where we are in terms of, you know, getting to a point of issuing a positive declaration and whether we're going to have a public scoping process or not. But from my perspective, a soon next step is for us to take the scope that we've provided and suggest that to them.
Right.
I'm
And
not sure we need to go through the scope that they provided tonight because you all have it. You can if you want, but that would be my suggestion, so that we just set it.
Is there a reason that we haven't shared this with the applicant yet?
Not from our perspective, I think it's just for you to do. I think,
Sure, it's really not, when Chazen issues comments to the board, Chazen
Okay.
If you'd like Jason to modify it, it sounds like what Steve's saying, Jason would like to modify it. But it's really up to you whether you want to share that with the applicant at this stage. There's no harm in doing so if ultimately the board agrees with what Jason has put forth there.
Maybe you have a copy we can take a look at?
I mean, there's nothing here that terrifies me. I think there's a difference in some of the things that the applicants talked about vis-à-vis traffic and what Chasen's talked about. So I think, as we said, that's something that still needs to be worked out and everybody needs to get on the same page. But I'm only one voice here, but I didn't see anything on the Chasen memo that scared me to share with the applicant.
And it's just out of the purpose for the modification.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of at that point, right,
Yeah.
where we might as well tell you what we want you to look at, and,
That would be really helpful.
yeah, I mean, you've heard from me.
There's only one way to keep this thing going, right?
So,
Yeah. Toss it over.
I thought that was all in the box.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, it's mostly traffic, all right.
Yeah, that was my impression as well. It's really just traffic as a discussion point. Right.
Most important, everything else I think is technical issues that are solvable.
Yep.
Hopefully traffic will be too.
I want the best advice from our engineers on all of the issues. I mean, Stu, as you can tell by the box there, that's the existing seeker record.
Oh, no, this is a fifth of the existing.
There you go.
Oh.
All right, so that's the important stuff from the existing, and Stu, of anybody in this room, has the best knowledge of how that thing is put together, and I want his best advice on all issues, for the best evaluation of the project.
Yeah, frankly, what Stu has here from 3 to the end, I don't see any problems with at all. And then, I'm too stupid to answer the traffic question, so I'm gonna punt on that one. And 1 is absolutely fine, because I think it'll be helpful in terms of the description. And I assume you all have it in front of you, so you know what I'm talking about. And I just want to say that we'll look at the air emission issue, but the largest warehouse I've been involved with building didn't have any air emission issues. No need even to register the air emission points, because the way DEC does it, the only thing is the BTUs capacity of the heaters or the air exchangers on the roof, and you put the best ones up there you can, and you're way under the threshold that DEC is established for that, so.
But Teresa, the scope of uses, right, that would be permitted, could result in a use that had higher air emissions, right? Because it's a very broad scope.
Well,
So our ability to hedge against that risk is to evaluate what you believe the emissions impacts would be and make
Right.
that part of the seeker record, right?
Right, the only issue is for most modern industrial facilities, okay, where today, it's 2021. So you're building a small manufacturing facility, it's gonna be really hard to guess what an air emission profile would be for a facility like that, if at all. And it may be more appropriate to have like a default in here, which would provide for future evaluation of air emissions as the proposals come before the planning board, because they could be very different,
Understood, and you
Yeah.
can appreciate on our side that we, in the
Sure.
face of that uncertainty, we want to hedge against
Well, there's always,
the risk of harm, right?
well, there's always uncertainty, but in New York State at least, the air emission regulations are incredibly stringent. And for a new facility, they're even more stringent. So we can say we can absolutely give you the profile for, a distribution center. We can give you the profile for a data center, again, none. So we can break out the categories, but it's gonna be hard to say what, if any, air emissions would be emitted from certain types of manufacturing facilities. We can try to come up with categories, but you're going to have to go back and look at that on a case-by-case basis.
The nature of zoning and development, right?
Yep.
I think, you know, what we did in the past is that there are thresholds
Right.
over which if a use exceeds the threshold, then, you know, certain mitigation kicks in. I think we'd probably do the same thing here. I would imagine these are strictly heating emissions.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so those thresholds should be easy to figure out.
Well, there's a Title V permit, which is the most stringent air permit that DEC issues. With new source review, no, God, no. No, I'm just saying, we can talk about the categories, and we can pretty much say categorically, we won't have that. And the only thing that we would ever be likely to have would be some sort of air registration, because DEC has really put it together in such a way that most modern facilities would qualify with an air registration. So we can talk about that, John.
Okay. My concern is not, you know, heating, it's manufacturing-related emissions.
Right, right. I understand.
I've got a question. The intent here overall is for warehousing, true?
That's one of the uses that's not currently allowed, and that's why we're focusing on that, yes.
Okay, and with the anticipation of other manufacturing also?
Well, we were asked to keep in the chip fab support type uses just in case someone came to us with one. So we will definitely do that. But you already have the air emissions profiles, all that down, because that's what was allowed there to begin with, okay? So the delta, if you will, is between things that have essentially no emissions, like warehouses,
Right.
and things that have a lot of emissions, like chip fab plants. So,
And I think to that point, by the way, that's been something we've really been missing from an economic development standpoint is, you know, the spec availability of semiconductor supply chain facilities. So I am glad to see that that's still a focus here.
yeah, we're certainly not precluding it, that's for sure.
Okay.
But I mean, to be intellectually honest about it, you're saying you got 3.5 million feet of what you feel is existing demand, and you're gonna build it quickly. So, I mean, I think we don't want to kid ourselves, right?
Well, if there was chip fab availability, it would all be built out there. Could have been built any time in the past, 30 years? So it is what it is. That's unfortunately the case.
Alrighty, so we've got kind of that taken care of with the scoping. We're going to wait for some more input from Shazen. Are there any other questions about any kind of non-traffic related issue?
Again, I've got a whole series of them. I don't intend to read them. I don't know if you guys, you know, I'm happy to receive the responses, you know, via email to the town board, if you prefer to do that. You know, whatever's the easiest way to answer the questions.
We can certainly do that, and we can certainly pinpoint those that'll be answered in the supplemental environmental impact statement too.
Okay, I
So-
would really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do that. The one thing you say is, should Saratoga County Public Works Department be listed on the basis of curb cuts? Sure. You know, when we started down this path, we didn't know that they owned the road, so now we
Mercifully.
do. And the other question that you had here was, why did we change 5 to take out the language regarding the trails to take out development area 5? We did check with the town, and all the trails have been built. That's our understanding.
Well, there's I haven't ridden back there since 2000 and maybe 8 or 9, but there's a series of mountain bike trails that go back through, you know, in that neighborhood that are heavily used. Whether they go over onto Area 5 or not, I'm not sure. I just know that in the vicinity of that area, there are a series of, you know, well-used trails.
Well, we'll certainly take a look at that.
Yep.
We didn't want to have any ambiguity about whether there are or there aren't, but
Yep.
I thought these were like asphalt trails. Is this just trails
No.
out through the sand?
They are,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
mountain bike trails. There's
Okay.
on the south, or excuse me, the west side of Hermes Road, there's a parking area there that's the trailhead, and they're heavily used.
And they're heavily used. Do
And we could put you in touch with a few folks that we can outline some of that as well. There's a few folks that are very, very active. I mean, I just saw in a Facebook group, people out riding today with studded tires, so.
Well, that's their boy.
They're hardy
Yeah,
souls.
they're hardy souls. They're hardy souls. Do you have any physical depiction of that as part of your parks or trails?
I don't think so.
I
haven't
think if
seen
you,
it.
They're not ours.
we don't, but I think if you dug around a little bit, you'd find that the mountain biking community probably has
Yeah,
some
I think it's
maps.
more ad hoc.
It
that
may
they have.
shock you that I'm not part of this community. I don't think so. So, yeah, if anybody has any link to something
There's a
online or
neighbor, there's a
something.
neighbor that lives in that neighborhood who is kind of the high chieftain of the mountain bikers,
Okay,
and I'll
great.
put you guys in touch, and
Thank
hopefully
you
you
very
can
much.
glean some intelligence there.
That would be very helpful. That would be very helpful. And I just want to look through here to see if there's, yeah, I honestly think that we've addressed a lot of your comments in going through this, but we have no problem responding to them individually.
That'd be
That'll just be
great.
good for the record. Any other questions while we're here at all?
About non-traffic first? Shall we go into traffic, or, oh, wait, Greg?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Supervisor. My name is Greg Connors from Global Foundries, and I want to, on behalf of the company, congratulate the applicant for bringing forth this project. We're excited about it, and compliment also the town board for the process. I know that this is among the first steps, in our experience has been a fairly long process. But I think it's not lost on the board, and I think and I know I want the record to reflect that the proposed changes in use are not what state or regional or local governments assured Global Foundries 10 years ago would support the technology campus, the basis of which we've invested $15 billion at that location. Now, it's possible that the project as proposed will solve some of the problems that has frustrated all of us in terms of the lack of any kind of development within the campus. But before we become an enthusiastic supporter or an aggressive opposer to the application, we're going to request that the town board and the applicant share whatever information they have. We have a very aggressive work stream within Global Foundries now that wants answers to noise, traffic, air, all the things that are of concern to the town board and to the residents of Malta. So I think it's important for that to be stated for the record. And again, congratulate the applicant on bringing forth the proposal, and we look forward to working closely as this process develops. I wanted to get that in before traffic, because traffic obviously is a major concern to the residents of the town of Malta. And as we consider manufacturing expansion within the campus, traffic, noise, air are going to be of great concern to us near term. So thank you, Mr. Supervisor, for the opportunity to offer a quick opinion.
Thanks very much, Greg, appreciate that. Okay, shall we begin our discussion of traffic? One of the basic questions that, I had concerning traffic was the point that Chazen, brought up in their January 19th memo, and that is, differences, what differences exist between a traditional warehouse, based on, those standards that are developed in terms of traffic flow, and the possible, more recent iteration of what distribution centers are, with the the online culture, that's developed. And so, I'm interested in what impact might that have on traffic.
Well, we have, in my firm, we've worked on about 20 to 30 warehouses. And the ITE numbers for warehousing have been, spot on. So what we can do is we can show you where the ITE data comes from, because I do believe they've recently updated the manual. And we can also see what data we have from other warehouses in the Northeast. That's no problem. So you can see, but I don't think you're gonna find a substantially different numbers with respect to old warehouses and new warehouses. I do think they're more efficient now because of the data, They have a lot of data, but, everybody's out there using their Amazon account, so there's no lack of business. So.
Again, you have my questions.
Yep.
There's the quantitative analysis, then I think there's here a qualitative analysis, right? Because the nature of the vehicles coming in is going to be different than what you have at Global Foundries, right? You're going to have more larger trucks coming in than Global Foundries would, which is mostly, passenger cars. So, I'm, curious about looking at the qualitative difference to traffic as well as the quantitative difference.
From a quantitative perspective, we will provide you an analysis of the IT numbers versus actual recent counts of similar distribution centers. And we'll provide that with our traffic assessment, so you can see, and then you can see the difference, and then also we will be using in our traffic analysis. So you'll see the backup and the theory and the methodology we use for our trip generation numbers.
Okay, Stu, I don't know, you may not know, but in the modeling that was looked at before, I assume that either the industry models or the analysis that was done at the time differentiated between the types of vehicles. It just seems like the mix will be different for this project.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a truck factor in the last one, which was a lot lower than the truck factor will be this time. So that's something that we want to ask for and understand. And I think I'm glad to hear Steve's response, which is we do think we need to see data from other similar warehouses because the nature of goods distribution is changing. The gig economy is high. The last couple packages ago, I ordered, kid, the beater drove up and dropped it at my door. He's got the gig, you go to the warehouse and he gets those packages, and that's how he's making his living. That's going to change the trip generation. I don't know how. Maybe at the end of the day, it works out the same. I don't know. But let's get some data and see.
Yeah. I think that's really all we can ask for, is we got to start make sure we're working from the same data set first and foremost, and that we all understand and agree that that data is accurate and reflective of reality, and then we can obviously make determinations from there.
I had made a point, and hopefully there's a chance that it's accurate, but because I'm keenly aware of my lack of recollection of how this thing is put together as it now stands on traffic mitigation. But the existing PDD provides for I think it's called Stage 4 series of mitigation measures that are required to be undertaken upon the construction of what was then believed to be imminent 8.2. The question is, well, why should the necessity of those mitigation measures be limited to construction of 8.2 when a project like this may generate the same environmental impact in the traffic area. Does that make sense, Stu? Yeah,
But that's the key, is the threshold.
Right.
So there is a threshold that is set aside separate from Global Foundries for the ancillary development area, and that's the 2,400 I referenced earlier. That's a threshold independent of Global that we will be measured against, and we'll do our analysis accordingly.
okay.
It's just because I think the numbers, I think it's 2,400 AM to 2,500 PM.
Correct. Yep.
2,400 is the more limiting of the two.
Right.
Correct.
And there will be 2 development areas that are not part of these amendments. What residue of trips will be left for them if you consume the numbers that you're looking at?
Correct. That's a development 4 and 11, and we'll address that also.
Okay.
If I may, Tom Johnson, who is our traffic engineer, is here. We brought him, and he knows more about traffic than any of us in this room, I bet.
Just as far as the thresholds go, at the 24 and the 2,500, there have been many other uses that have subtracted from that already, so we're not, we would be starting from that level. We have a June 14th memo from 2014 memo, where we have 300 to 500 trips left out of that original threshold. So that is something with the fulfillment center or the last mile center, which can generate a tremendous amount of traffic that we've seen in the ITD manual, that will eat away from that number very quickly. That's why we, he said he's gonna provide us with a whole bunch of information and data. We also wanna know how the center will be used.
We would count, it would be enormously helpful to us to have that memo because it doesn't appear to be in the public record today. What we've looked at to familiarize ourselves with the situation, and I'll just, we looked at all the SEISs, we looked at the traffic studies in those, we looked at the overall study for the entire area that had been done by Creighton Manning, which I think is like the most recent study. So if there's anything out there that was not public, we do not have it, and Tom, it would be most helpful to get that.
Yeah, it was based on a Creighton Manning study. Actually, somebody had requested an assessment of the threshold, what would remain for traffic, based on everything that was built to date. And so the memo was basically, it was a review of that letter from Creighton Manning. So we can certainly share that.
Was that before, the Global Foundries Phase 2 was approved, or after?
I think it came after.
It came after.
I believe so. I don't have a date.
Teresa, you've seen the, I'm going to call it the Exit 11A study for shorthand because I don't know. It had a fancy name and Congressman Tonko, was in the middle of it. You guys have seen that traffic study as well? Okay, so you have all that data. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it seems like exit 11A is not an option. Based on everything, it's not an option for us for sure, but it also sounds like after the Creighton Manning study that was sort of put to the side. So, and that's our understanding. So if our understanding is
But
wrong,
there's going to
we need
be,
to know.
there's going to be some data and stuff in there that might be of some utility to you.
okay, great. Tom, is there anything else out there, again, that's not public that would be helpful since 2014? Because it, yeah, because there was a SEIS in 2015, and then there was a PDD amendment in 2017. So I would have thought that information would be in one or two, and referenced in.
Well, I believe the threshold from the memo you just got from us
Yep.
was mentioned as part of 2015 senior planning.
Okay, all right, okay. Well,
I have to say that I don't really understand what Tom said, but it didn't sound hopeful. It sounded like there was going to be more of a squeeze than we thought. That's kind of my impression.
The point is we said, this is how many trips the road system can accommodate. This is how many have been used. This is how many is left.
Right.
How many are you guys going to generate? That's compare.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I It is what it is.
It is what it
And I
is.
think the key thing, is I think everything else is kind of, we know what the numbers are, the key thing is how many trips you're gonna generate.
Right.
And so in this case, real life data is important from warehouses that operate like these things.
Stuart, once these, and Tom, once these thresholds are reached, what steps have to be taken before they can be exceeded?
Would be another traffic study. And it's a very intensive traffic study of a lot of intersections to see if the phase four improvements will be needed. At which time, that's where the exit 11A came in the discussion, which at the time was studied and deemed not necessary prior, but if these trips are very high, then we need to look at what other types of physical improvements that are already noted have to happen. So it needs to do another traffic study.
We're not talking about a full-blown new counts, new traffic study here. We're talking about comparing this record to the past record. But the point is, if we think that these are going to exceed the thresholds that have been previously established, then it's kind of a new ballgame. I mean, it's just a small exception and we probably won't care. But if it's well over, then you're talking about taxing the road network and there might be need for physical improvements, and then you're into something much bigger.
Right, and your thresholds are still your PM peak, your AM peak, right, yeah.
To that end, one of my questions was about, when is the traffic actually on the roads? And not that anybody in this room needs to be reminded that I'm somewhat limited in my mental faculties, but I don't remember whether the existing PDD and seeker record have constraints in there on, when traffic can run in and out of the tech campus. And just construction. So, something that's on my mind is when are you gonna be running these trucks through the tech campus?
What, for construction or for
No,
operation?
no, for operations.
Okay, yeah, well, we're doing it by hour, just like you do all the time, so.
The thresholds are based on a peak hour, and we'll do our
I
analysis
understand.
accordingly, yeah.
But noise impact, is potentially, noise at 1 o'clock in the morning is different than noise, at noon, in terms of impact on a community.
What?
So when the traffic study is done, how does it separate the, certain roads heading in there? Do they focus on one heavily trafficked street, or is it equally split up between Dunning Street, et cetera, all the streets?
I think we need to clarify one thing. The first piece is really a traffic assessment, is what we're calling.
So it's like phases.
It doesn't make those distinctions.
Right.
It doesn't?
If we go over the threshold, that's when a full-blown traffic study would be. And that's when we get into what intersections would need to be evaluated, and Tom's in better shape to talk about this than I am, so I'll let him.
My biggest concern probably is Dunning Street traffic and Maltaville traffic in trailer trucks, especially. I get those calls now.
So
They're only gonna go up.
Thinking ahead towards later in the process, specifying truck routes for things that can be done.
Are tried anyways to encourage truck traffic in a certain area.
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
The reality is, though, that, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but the reality, and if you look, this was a point of frustration for me, was the existing seeker record, the PDD, I don't remember which, to try and control construction traffic when Global Foundries was built, I think went to the extreme extent of requiring that the general conditions of the contract for all the contractors would require that they went a certain way. And guess what? They didn't all go that way. And everybody said, well, what do you want us to do? We can't stop these trucks. The dump truck comes. So, you know, let's be realistic about our ability to actually tell trucks where they're going to go.
And I totally agree with that point. And in particular, if we're talking about the last mile delivery truck, you know, you want to go in the direction of your deliveries rather than around the merry-go-round.
You remember Paul Sawsville had the barriers put up there and almost got us all arrested. You know, I don't want to do that again. Somebody talked, you know, we talked our way out of that one last time. I don't want to be arrested.
Well, we'll try to provide more description of the last mile, because you talked about a beater, so, I mean, if it's people in vans and vehicles, it's, you know, I mean, look at your SUV. It's not, we'll try to address that.
If there's an ability with a traffic study to limit the number of Amazon trucks that my wife is allowed to summon to our house, let me know where to sign up on that.
No, there isn't. Anything else other than, anything else you want us to look at in terms of the assessment?
No, certainly your staff wants to talk to you, just reach out, that's what you can comment.
But the key thing is, and I'm not sure the timing is for the declaration of significance and, you know, a draft scoping document, but I think from my perspective, one of our next task is to suggest a revised scoping document, get with the applicant's son.
Yep.
Hear everything we've done here tonight, and then do that to you.
Well, do you want us to take a shot at revising it, so you can take it from there? I mean, I think that might be helpful. Yeah, that would be good.
Although I tell you, I think I work cheaper than you.
I'm not drafting anything having to do with traffic. I can tell you that.
That's fine, that's the board is, and we're gonna add what we think should be the next draft. That's fine.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
So is that the next step then, that scoping thing coming from you to Stewart, and then, you know, they'll be provided to the board and everybody? What else? What's the next step? It's going to be sent to the town planning board and to the county planning board, and Jamie, you'll be doing that, you know, this week, I guess. What are the next steps?
Well, I think the board might be in a position to decide and address how you want to go about secret at your next regularly scheduled meeting, if that's what you want. The first step there would be what has already been mentioned, which is that the board would decide whether or not the changes to the PD, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Whether or not the changes being proposed to the PDD legislation, that action, inclusive of any development that's planned, whether that action is likely to exceed the previous secret review. In other words, is it new and different? Is it likely to result in any new and different impacts the board hasn't considered yet? If yes, then we would at that point direct the applicant to go forth with a draft EIS. You can decide at that point whether to have a formal scoping, which would require, additional time, but would allow public participation, or whether you want to dictate the scope of the EIS in accordance with the discussion that's been kind of going on about what should the EIS cover. Obviously, the broader the scope that the board decides on, the less likely an actual scoping session would be helpful. Because if you're going to have a very broad scope to your EIS, it's unlikely that public participation would really add anything to that. But it's up to you. And so the next step for secret purposes would be deciding on that. And also, I skipped this step. You've already identified yourself as wanting to be the lead agency. You would also confirm at that time that you are in fact the lead agency moving forward for secret review.
The applicant seems pretty much, as I understand it, and Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, ready to concede that, you know, the significance is, significant impact is going to happen here, and that an EIS is appropriate. Is there a way to relieve ourselves from going through the EAF and having a further discussion and making that finding? And
Yeah, have to go through part 2 of the EAF form, and there might be disagreement between us and the applicant. The reason we don't think you have to do that is we don't think this is a standalone new and different secret action requiring what's called a determination of significance, a positive declaration or a negative declaration. You all already adopted a positive declaration a long time ago at the beginning of the secret process. Now what you're deciding is whether or not this new and different aspect of a previously reviewed secret action requires additional review.
What form does that take?
A simple resolution,
Okay.
yeah,
So we could take those actions at our March 29th meeting, correct?
Well, I propose that we schedule that for the March 29th meeting, if the
I'd
board's
agree.
okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, does that sound good?
Yep, absolutely.
Any
That
other?
gives us 3 weeks to
Right,
get a lot of this information transferred.
Yep.
and
Yep.
Homework done.
any other items we should address tonight? Okay, we're good. Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much,
much.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Looking forward to the next steps here. Thank you.
Very helpful, thank you.
Thank you.